The Mind's Eye with BJ Turnoff is available on iTunes, Pandora, Amazon, and all major platforms. Appreciate you listening. Appreciate you subscribing. Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the Mind's Eye, the intersection of history and mystery, the center of science and the strange, and your source for the subliminal to the criminal. I'm DJ BJ Turnoff, host of this auditorium of audacity. I've always been a museum guy, even as a boring little kid, especially art ones. What can I say? I guess I'm just so cultured. Even if I wasn't based in Baltimore, I still think one of my favorite ones is the American Visionary Art Museum. It's just so fascinating. The inside, the outside, the architecture, the exhibitions that they have. The AVAM, as it's called, is they specialize in weird outsider art. They have paintings from Ingo Swann. If you know that name, he's a government remote viewer. They got it from like the Alex Grays of the world. So if you're ever in Baltimore, definitely go check it out. And if you love me so much, we'll even get a beer. Just reach out. And the reason I bring it up is because I just had a recent visit there. So I'm kind of jonesing for some type of art episode. And I can't help but not think about Salvador Dali every time I go visit him. Although they would never display him because he's formally trained and they only do self-taught artists. But there's definitely a huge inspiration from the oddities of Dalí that go into the museum. Whether you love or hate his artwork or don't even know Dalí, trust me, you do. I'll tell why in a second. He did change the game. We're going to talk about how this eccentric genius changed the art world and created a lasting legacy, the Dalí legacy. There is a book out right now of the same name. We're bringing in the authors, noted art historians, Dr. Jean-Pierre Isbouts and Dr. Christopher Heath Brown. They're going to be here in a Mind's Eye moment. Together, they're going to take us on an immersive dive into the life, work, and psychology of this 20th century artist, painter, filmmaker, and designer. Along the way, they're going to unlock the origins of Dalí's outrageous behavior and the mysteries behind some of his most famous paintings. We're going to start with The Persistence of Memories, the one with the dripping clocks. You may have seen it on a stoner buddy's couch somewhere, probably mine if you knew me about 20 years ago. Or you've seen a terrible tattoo version somewhere. I know I've seen way too many of those. So most likely you probably have seen this painting somewhere. So you know Dalí and his ridiculous mustache, whether you really were conscious of it or not. That's how much influence he does have. We're going to explore all of that and do somewhat of a deep dive into his religious beliefs, talk about how he believed in reincarnation, and he actually underwent an exorcism. So lots to talk about. More information about the guests and the show on our website, themindseyemedia.com. While you're there, you might as well download over the 100+ episodes for free right now. If you end up loving the smorgasbord content, as I like to say, you appreciate the hard work, the production costs that go into each and every episode, please show just a little bit of support. All you got to do is press the donate button at the top of the website. Everyone, no matter how big or small you donate, you're going to get a free, never aired before episode. And the more you donate, the more you're going to get. Check out the rewards list on the website, themindseyemedia.com. And thank you so much for your support. While you're there, you might as well check out the links to our social media pages where I post hand-selected articles that I read throughout the week, like the one about Mexico's Bermuda Triangle, or why Channel 37 doesn't exist, and it has something to do with aliens. You can also read my recent blog about Hamilton and the election and bringing the country together. I know, heaven forbid, right now in America. Lots of fun, fascinating, educational information all under one roof. Again, themindseyemedia.com. All right, no more. I'm absolutely delighted to brush up with these two fine gentlemen here on the Mind's Eye, Dr. Christopher Heath Brown and Jean-Pierre Isbouts. together they have co-authored a couple books on Leonardo da Vinci. We're going to talk about their latest on Salvador Dali. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
It's our pleasure.
All right. Let's start with Professor Jean-Pierre Isbouts here, art historian, professor, author, producer, TV host. Your research has touched on anything from art to afterlife. You're a true Renaissance man here. Tell me a little bit about how you originally connected with your co-author here.
Well, it was through my literary agent, Peter Miller, was introduced to Chris Brown, and the two of us got together, and we found that we are very complementary. Chris is an incredible connoisseur and a collector of our works, including works from Dalí, and I'm sure he'll tell you lots more about it. And so for the last, 7 years now, we've been co-authoring books. At the same time, we've been producing films. I always believe that as an academic, we have to speak the language of the 21st century, which is media. So from a very early age on, right after I got my doctorate in art history, I was engaged to do a film about Vincent van Gogh with none other than Leonard Nimoy. And that sort of launched my career as both a scholar and a filmmaker. So when Chris and I got together, we've so far produced 3 wonderful shows, all the search for mysteries in art history, and particularly related to Leonardo da Vinci. The first one was about The Last Supper. The second one was about the Mona Lisa. And the third one that we just completed and will be distributed later this year is about the Virgin of the Rocks, perhaps one of Leonardo's most enigmatic paintings. So that's in a nutshell how we've been working together for the last couple of years.
And if all the work together is beautiful and as energetic and with zest as how you pronounce Vincent's last name there, then I'm sure they're all fantastic. Doctor, and you're no slouch yourself here, Dr. Christopher Heath Brown. Share a little bit about your road from oral surgeon to being one of the most prominent Salvador Dali collectors in the United States.
I was a prolific finger painter when I was little, of course, and I've always been interested in art. And as being an oral maxillofacial surgeon, that's basically art in a different way. It's on an individual patient, of course. And as being an oral maxillofacial surgeon, why that interested me more so than possibly being a plastic surgeon is we actually get to move the face around and help fix people with bad bites or distorted faces, or people who've been injured by gunshots or cancer and need cancer reconstruction. So it's a very rewarding field, but at the same point has allowed me to collect some art that I really enjoy personally. And I don't know, it was about 10 years ago, my sister gave me a New York Times from the day I was born, which was March 23rd in 61. So I'm going to be 60 on the same day this book comes out. And in that newspaper is actually Salvador Dali in a picture on one of the pages, entertaining one of the duchesses of Europe. And so it just is very interesting that on the very same day I'm born, here is Salvador Dali in New York, living it up as an artist, but also as a character of sorts. And that's partly why I like him so much. He basically, took Renaissance type art and put in a style of surrealism to it. But at the same point, he also had his own style, and he kind of went through different genres of painting and drawing as he aged. I have actually begun collecting the lithographs of Dali, or the graphic works of Dali, about 20 years ago. And there's probably about 3,000 actual graphic works. And I have about 5 or 6 of them that are one of a kinds. And I'm 8 pieces away from having every single graphic. And, my goal in the future is to hopefully put this into a museum and for everybody to see every single graphic that he ever did. The most famous paintings that he did, of course, are in the 2 museums, either the Dalí Foundation in Spain or in Florida in St. Petersburg at the Dalí Museum. and his paintings go for millions of dollars. So I've been able to collect, the graphic works, which are in the thousands of dollars rather than the millions of dollars. And I'm very proud of the collection that I put together. But at the same point, I've been interested in kind of the developmental process of what Dalí went through, not only at the beginning drawing and study stages of his drawings, but also in working with the publishers. So several of my sets are from the very beginning to the end of the publishers working with Dalí, and you can see how the entire process was unfolded and exactly what was in his mindset. And it really has fascinated me. And I would say in the last 10 years, I've been collecting more of the one-of-a-kind studies for his most prominent works. And 3 of those beautiful drawings are in this book. They, for the first time ever being published, people will be able to see those drawings and the history behind them, and how intentional Dalí was when he drew or painted. He just didn't just go up to the canvas all the time and just write his name or just splash some ink up there, or even shoot the canvas with a gun with ink like a paintball. He actually sat down and really worked on these pieces so that it would come out exactly the way he wanted to, and even sometimes have a secret mystery entwined into it that he would want the viewer to try to figure out, because he, at the end of his life, really didn't like people just looking at his art and taking a minute or two and looking at it and liking the colors. He really wanted people to look deep at the art and try to understand that.
And I guess since you just dated yourself, let me do the same for Jean-Pierre over here, and respectfully so. You remember a time when art circles of the 60s and 70s were opposed to Dalí and his art. Touch on that history a little bit, and what made you want to write about Dalí or revisit Dalí now after all these years?
No, that's a very good question. And when I went to graduate school in history of art, this was back in the early 70s in Holland, where I was born, at the Leiden University. I remember my professors at the time were dead set against Salvador Dali. They called him little more than an illustrator. And the reason was that during World War II, and I was born just a few years after that, figurative art, realism in art, had lost its legitimacy, because that was the style that was pushed by totalitarian regimes, both by Stalin in the Soviet Union and Hitler in Germany. And realism really lost its legitimacy as a result of that experience. And so in the post-war years, art critics basically rejected any form of figurative art and looked for abstract artists to really carry forward the new horizons in the history of modern art. And as a result, Dalí was absolutely ignored and denounced. If you were lucky, they would perhaps show premonition of the Civil War, which he painted in 1937. Of course, at the time when he painted it, it wasn't really called that. He was simply very much into soft and hard surfaces and textures, which he had learned from Spanish Baroque painters such as Velázquez and Murillo. But beyond that particular painting, I never heard about Dalí. In fact, one of my professors said, I don't even want to utter the man's name. And of course, part of that was that, Dalí was really into self-promotion. He always said, it's amazing to wake up in the morning and be Dalí. What a great blessing it is. And of course, in art critical circles, it's always about modesty and be cool, And so the Dalí figure rubbed them the wrong way. His sense of becoming a brand, he was actually many years ahead of his time in really pushing himself as a brand. And he very early figured out that he could get away with that in the United States, not in Europe. He never tried such shenanigans in Europe, or rarely so. But in America, he found a very receptive, some might say gullible, audience for such hijinks. And the reason is that I think as Americans, we are very much smitten by the idea of the European bohemien, the provocateur, who is, the nonconformist, who goes his own way. We're sort of ourselves, we're pioneers. And that's why these shenanigans that he pulled in the window of Saks Fifth Avenue and other things, Americans loved it. The reason why Chris and I wanted to write this book is that one aspect of his work has never been really truly examined, and that is the influence from the old masters or any other form of realism on his work. I mean, one thing that Salvador Dali to this day was very proud of. I mean, he wrote at one point, and we quoted in the book, that he saw himself as a messianic figure who could resolve the growing tensions between science and art, between sterile modernism and pure beauty, between reason and faith, all the incredible tensions of our modern era. He saw himself as the Messiah who could resolve that, who could somehow find a bridge between the world of science, modernism, and beautiful art. And that's really how he saw himself. And I think we're slowly starting to appreciate that. And what Chris and I tried to do in this book is see what were the impulses for that incredible realism that he was able to achieve.
I probably kind of represent what most of Dali's fans are, people that enjoy the work but don't really have that much information about him outside of, the eccentric, him being eccentric and the mustache. You don't really, it's hard because of that, his surrealism and that art and its mystery, you really don't see how much he is a lover of the great masters and is constantly, repetitively, always paying direct homage to them. Where do you see some examples in that, Chris?
I'll say initially it was a little bit of a struggle because I kind of had to twist Jean-Pierre's arm a little bit just to write about Dali because of his past experience. But with all our research with Da Vinci, we saw so much of an overlap, and especially Dali really took Da Vinci and these other Renaissance artists, into his corner. So kind of like 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, I started noticing that Dali would have certain levels of interest into the Renaissance artist. And although he's really described as being the surrealist, that was really just a smaller period of time within Dali's paintings. So what really makes me want to collect out of all of his works the most are his religious works, which I think are phenomenal. And they're all over the world, these religious works that he's done, these beautiful paintings. And, of course, the Renaissance artists, their patrons were paying them to paint religious works. So, one of the works of Dali's, one of his first paintings is called The Persistence of Memory, that he was became so famous, and it's the dripping clocks in the desert and with an oceans and mountain scene in the background. And, he basically, what he had done is taken a Da Vinci painting, Da Vinci's first painting of the baptism of Christ, and he replaced 2 angels with 2 dripping clocks, and he put Christ's clock in a tree like the crucifixion, and then a John the Baptist like anthropomorphic head on the ground. And all he did is recreated a Da Vinci painting, but with a twist of surrealism, because in 1929, 1930, he was really absorbed in that surrealism movement. But then that would progress with time with, like, for example, the nuclear period of time, and he would then take the persistence of memory, and it would be the disintegration of the persistence of memory, and how, like a nuclear attack or an atom explosion or breaking atoms apart, would then explode time. And of course, all this was being, influenced by Einstein's theory of relativity and also Einstein's theory on time. So I think it was really clear that if you looked at Velázquez and you looked at Raphael, and he had a period of time in the 1970s where he did a suite called Changes in Great Masterpieces. And he took some of these famous artists as well as the persistence of memory, and he just did one little change in each of the paintings. And all of the paintings except for his were of Raphael, Da Vinci, other Renaissance artists, and he just made one change. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to force the viewer into looking really deeply as to what that change in the great masterpiece was, instead of just looking at it casually. So he was very calculated in his painting, and depending on what period of time he was trying to paint or draw or express his ideas, he would take that art to a different degree, which was very intellectual. And if you're just a casual observer, you're not going to understand that. But our book tries to bring a little deeper understanding about how he kind of wanted to apply time. And I think one of the reasons he respected Da Vinci so much is Da Vinci, he realized, put time elements into his painting. Even the Last Supper has time elements. It's not only Da Vinci's Last Supper at the time that Judas is, that Christ is going to announce that one of you will betray me, but you have a doubting Thomas who's putting his fingers to the sky that's going to probe the spear of destiny, spear sight into the right side of Christ's body during the resurrection. Or it's, one of the apostles holding a knife in his hand, Paul, who's going to have his ear cut off in the Garden of Gethsemane that night. Or it has to do with even before sitting down at the Last Supper dinner, and here you have Judas with a bag of coins sitting on the Last Supper table. So he realized Da Vinci applied time elements to his painting, and it just wasn't a painting of a stagnant moment of time. And he was able to put the dripping clocks that have different times on them in the persistence of memory. So one clock might be 2 to 6, the next clock is at 6, the next clock is at 2 after 6. So you have the past, the present, and the future represented in the persistence of memory. But a lot of people really, they just say, oh, Dalí was that guy who painted crazy things, but it's really not. He took classicism of these beautiful, old master artists and just put a little twist of it, and he replaced one item with another item. And that's why it's so fun in each of his, graphic works, is trying to figure out, well, what was this guy thinking, and why did he do this, and how much time did he take to do that?
And I want to stick with the persistence of memory just for a brief moment, because it is really his most famous work, and you made some really great observations about that. I want to get Jean-Pierre's take on that. Some say that the painting is an autobiographical portrait of Dalí's first romantic relationship with a woman, Gala, his muse. Do you see it that way, Jean-Pierre, or have a different interpretation on that one?
Well, of course, we should always start with what Dalí himself had to say on the subject. And he has a wonderful story that one day they had dinner, and Gala was going out to the movies, and she said, "Would you like to come along?" And he said, I don't. No, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to putter around. And she said, "Okay." And while that was going on, she left. She went to the movies, and he was staring at the cheeses that had been left on the plate, and it was camembert and other wonderful cheeses that you can get in Europe. And he was saying, gee, he was really fixated on these what he called super soft elements. He was always fascinated with the contrast between soft and hard elements and what they mean to the beholder. And so he went back to the studio where he was working on an idea, and he suddenly saw the solution. He said, the picture that happened to sit on the easel, he said, represents the landscape near Port Yougat, which is, of course, where he had a cabin, right on the Bay of Cadaqués, where he did most of his paintings, and that beautiful landscape around the Bay of Cadaqués returns time and time again in his work. And there he saw in the foreground an olive tree with its branches cut and without leaves. And I knew then that the atmosphere which I had succeeded in creating with this landscape was to serve as a setting for an idea, for a surprising image. Except I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was supposed to be. And then he said, all of a sudden, he saw the solution to the problem that he'd been struggling with. He saw 2 watches, he wrote, one of them hanging on the branch of the olive tree. And even though he was still not feeling quite well, he grabbed his palette, set to work, and that's how persistence of memory, which originally was known as soft watches, by the way, I think Gala came up with the idea of the persistence of memory. She found that to be a
much better name.
much more brandable, And of course, that became his most famous work. Interestingly enough, it was purchased by Julian Levy, who was one of the very young art dealer who had just set up a gallery, in fact, on Madison Avenue in New York. But that's how Dalí was introduced to the American public through persistence of memory. And that's why, of course, it is right now such an incredibly famous painting to this day.
And I have two things to add to that.
Yeah, please do.
Obviously we both have seen this beautiful painting, but it's just the size of a piece of paper. It's one of his smaller works. And it's just as amazing how some of his smaller works are some of the most famous works that he had. But I'll tell you, when Gala came home that night from going to the movies, when Dalí was painting The Persistence of Memory, as soon as she came to the door, he had a blindfold there for her. And he put the blindfold on her and he said, "I'm done with my painting. I want you to look at it and tell me the first thing that comes to your mind." And he took the blindfold off and she says, "Oh my, once you see this, you can never forget it." So, of course, it was renamed The Persistence of Memory in regards to her response to the painting.
And truly is, and thankfully, yeah, what is so much of a better name than Soft Clocks, obviously. Yeah, that was one of my favorite stories from the book. Doctor, staying with you for a moment, how do we see there's a lot of images in the piece Persistence of Memory that are you see over and over again with Dalí, ants, grasshoppers, and they show you that have meaning to him. I guess it's his obsession with death. How else does the piece show a window into Dalí's psychology?
Well, of course, those are symbols, and these symbols had specific meaning to him. Of course, he was terrified of grasshoppers. And so that was one of the things with grasshoppers. And on one of the watches in The Persistence of Memory, of course, there's a whole bunch of ants crawling on the watch. And to him, that was one symbol for the ants, is the decay of time, or time decay, or death. And of course, in Dalí's past, he had lost his mother, who he cherished greatly. He was I think this was in 1921 when she passed away. So he was only 16 or 17 years old at the time, and it greatly affected him, of course. And he was also born just after his brother had passed away, and I think he passed away about 9 months prior to Dalí being born. And his parents always kind of gave him the idea that he was a reincarnation of his brother, and he had to kind of act and behave for both of them, that he was representing both of them. So even in The Persistence of Memory, there's two rocks that are in the painting, and one of the rocks is in the darkness and is up by the tree, which is between the past and the present. And then there's another rock that's over by the mountains in Katakay, and that rock, of course, is in the light, and that's Dalí. And there was a comment that Dalí said, is that my brother and I are not not two single drops of water. We're one drop of water with two different reflections. So if you draw lines to what looks like a water plate in The Persistence of Memory, you kind of have one line going up and one line going horizontal, and where they intersect is a single drop, and here's the two reflections. So he hid specific things in these paintings that made sense to him, and that he hoped would make sense to somebody analyzing his paintings down the road. But that Persistence of Memory is really another time-oriented thing. And if you do think of it in the Da Vinci mode, of which we wrote the essay at the end of the book, it is an honor to Da Vinci, but also to religion and to Christ, because the Persistence of Memory of what we've been told through the Bible or other sources in Christianity is persisted in our memory, and why we try to lead a clean life, or a good Christian life, or a good, religious life, regardless of what religion you are. So, although most people wouldn't directly say this is a religious work, to some degree it is.
So, did he really believe in reincarnation, or was that just part of his, his image that he was trying to make?
I think he believed in reincarnation initially, but then after his visit with the Pope in 1948, he had a drastic swing in his beliefs, and from between 48 and the mid 60s, he was really motivated by religion, and really some of his most beautiful works were his Christian or religious works. And not just Christian, it was Judaism, it was Islamic, Muslim. There were all types of different religions that he addressed in his different ways through his art.
And we'll come back to that, but since we're a little bit talking about his psychology here, let's stay there. And you mentioned a few tragic events that happened during his childhood and formative years. With his dead brother, that kind of that shadow looming large over him, and then also the death of his mother. Not to also mention that his mother, I believe, dressed him up as a child, as a girl, as a child, and he had a lot of these horrible things happen to him, and when. In one way, you feel terrible for him, and then the other idea, the idea that you kind of, as a fan, you have to reconcile with is that without these tragic events, there would be no Dalí and these amazing pieces. I mean, have you ever thought about that, Professor?
Oh, his autoeroticism is, of course, a major motif of his work, and a lot of theories have been spun about it. I mean, some say he never really had relations with his wife, that he was not able to have conjugal relations because when he was a kid, his father always pointed him to a book with the most horrific venereal diseases. Of course, in Spain, and a very Catholic country in the beginning of the 20th century, and sex was verboten. It was only allowed within the bonds of marriage and then with the curtains closed and the light off. So a very different approach to sexuality. And it's possible that experience of seeing these horrific injuries and organs all corrupted by venereal diseases may have made such an impression on him that he felt, well, it's probably safer just to service yourself, and that the sexual act was simply not possible for him. Today, we are much more flexible about it. We know that sexuality can have many, many different forms, and we don't judge it that way. But of course, it was different for him in the 1920s and 30s. But it does explain why the erotic motifs are so prevalent in his work. You see Catholic Christian motifs side by side with beautiful nudes, and he can paint them very, very well. And for some people, that's odd. I think, as Chris said, I think it's liberating. I mean, we have started to think differently about these ideas in recent years.
And sexuality definitely is it's a spectrum for sure. Staying with that relationship with Gayla, she's been painted in so many different lights, from muse to destructive influence. Chris, what do you think of her? And also, do you think that there was a level of respect and reciprocity between the two in the relationship?
Well, I will say very early on, and even on the Persistence of Memory, not only is Dalí's name written, but so is Gayla's name. So he truly loved her. He was devastated when she passed away in the early 80s. In fact, he was so devastated it probably contributed to him having a stroke, and his declining, last 5 years are all based on his severe depression. In fact, I think he even was lit on fire in his bed as a result of the depression he had after she passed away. And she was noted for having other lovers, and she had her own castle, and he was forbidden to even come over there unless he told her he was going to come. But, he basically said, I love Gayla even more than I love money. And Gayla was pretty much the banker of the money. She made sure that he got the money and that money got in the bank. But for him, his whole life revolved around Gayla. And there's so many wonderful pictures of the two of them together. So, of course, there's, I think in any marriage, there can be, potentially destructive things or things that are the valleys. But I think his peaks and his, tall mountain ranges of love with her in ways that they both did things together were huge. And I really think she helped to bring him into Christianity a little bit more, in that 1948 period of time where, basically he painted Gayla as the Madonna, and that painting was given as a gift to the Pope.
Did he believe in God?
Well, I think he was a Catholic, as many Catholics are. I mean, certainly smitten with certain ideas, believed that there was a divine power. But I can't say that he was necessarily an observant Catholic, but then many people today are. I think what Dalí said, he tried to capture that divine power, that divine energy in so many of his paintings, particularly near the end of his life, in these huge canvases that you can see in the Dalí Museum in St. Petersburg. And I urge your listeners to go there. It's such a beautiful museum. But that doesn't necessarily translate into belief in certain doctrine or dogma or tenets. I think he saw God as a reality, and he saw it as a living presence and a living inspiration in his art, just as Caracas and Gala were living sources of inspiration.
There's something that was snuck there in the back with the timeline. It says in 1947, Dalí underwent an exorcism by an Italian friar in France. That was never explained in the book or detailed. I can't let that pass. Does anyone have any details about that?
My only recollection of that is, again, this comes to that showman type of thing, and that he kind of had to cleanse himself before he could paint that painting for the Pope that he would deliver to the Pope in 1948.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he I guess he said that his eccentricity was just a calculated act. You know, sometimes it seems like it was almost bordering on a facade, and sometimes it's hard to kind of differentiate between what was real and what wasn't with him. And I guess that was obviously the point.
There's no doubt about that. And I think he had some feelings of his own where maybe he thought he had treated his father inappropriately at times. But his father was, very difficult for him, and sometime in the late 30s, Dalí basically said, you were only good as a sperm donor to me, and that's all you were ever good for. And he, in fact, sent a condom full of sperm to his dad saying, this is all you were good for. So I think he regretted some of the ways that he had interacted with his dad, maybe even his sister. And I think that was just, he knew at that point that he needed to be saved. I think America had some type of influence on him as well. One of the things that's been interesting to me recently are some paintings that were lost in Billy Rose's estate in New York. They used to be in the Ziegfeld Museum or the Ziegfeld Theater from 1944 to 1954. And then Billy Rose moved them to his home estate in Mount Kisco. And these 7 paintings got burned up in a fire, and they had to do with the 7 lively arts. So, in this, mid 40s, Dalí was really struggling financially. Billy Rose helped him. And after those paintings burned up in a fire, he painted them for free for Billy Rose. And that was in 1957 because they burned in the fire in 1956. And that, specifically had to do with the 7 lively arts. But again, this is right before he really, finds Jesus, and he is affected in some way, not only by the Pope, but by Gala, and wanting to find a closer relationship with God. It's just the problem is when you have certain things that happen, before that, and then you continue to be a showman, you just question how much was he dedicated to, finding Christ again. I do want to add that our book is getting rave reviews right now. We're getting rave reviews, and we're so happy about that because we really want to share Dalí in a little bit more positive light than most people understand him right now, I think.
The Dalí Legacy, How an Eccentric Genius Changed the Art World and Created a Lasting Legacy. Professor Jean-Pierre Isbouts, Dr. Christopher Heath Brown, you painted a complex picture of the man. Let's circle back for the next one. I appreciate your time. All right. Since you stuck around so long, let me be even more serious with you, even though I said it was all culture before, but I know you didn't really even take that serious. I did discover Dalí on the Stoner Buddy's couch, which then became mine. And he became the artist of some of my favorite pieces that I did used to stare at under hallucinogenics. And goddamn, those were the days. No more, unfortunately. I'm getting a little old for that. But now I just stare at those paintings in bewilderment. It definitely still boggles my mind, but in a different way. Just like next episode, we're going to go from Dalí to near-death experiences. Hope you join us. Until then, be well and let well be. I'm DJ BJ Turnoff signing off for The Mind's Eye.